pleasure to be in front of you this morning to talk a little bit about Educational Finance 101. I will just take a minute to say that Wisconsin has the most complicated educational finance system that there is. Having worked in North Dakota, Colorado, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, the other three states are very simple. Wisconsin makes it very complicated to understand. The other piece about educational finance is unlike the revenue that you receive in your house from your income, and you can disperse it however you would like to. Education is hand-tied by state statute. And so often what you'll see happening in an educational system is that you have a surplus in one account. For example, Shawano School District has a surplus in Fund 49, which is our food service account. And you can think about why we might have that surplus right now, because for the last 2 years, the federal government has backfilled our free and reduced lunch costs. And so that fund balance in Fund 49 is at a significant surplus right now. We need to spend that fund balance down. But where can we spend that fund balance? We can only spend that fund balance on food service. So that means looking at our cafeterias, looking at our equipment, looking at our tables, but we can't take those funds and move them somewhere else. And that's one of the most frustrating pieces in education, is that we don't have the flexibility to be able to move funds to where we need to. We have a general revenue fund, Fund 10. We have Fund 49. I'm going to look at my finance director. Fund 49 is completely capital improvements. So I share that with you to help build a foundation to understand the complexities within educational finance. And with us today, we have Josh Swanson, our Director of Finance. He joined Shawano Public Schools in July 1st. And we have Eric from PMA. Eric, we've been a partner with PMA for
like 6-8 years.
And they do the behind-the-scenes financial analysis for us to help us stay current, to help us make sure that we are doing our due diligence with taxpayer dollars. So we're going to start the presentation with Eric, then we're going to turn it over to Josh, and then if you have any questions, we will do our best to answer them, or we will take them down and we're going to create an FAQ from today's sessions. We're doing one at 7:30, one at 11:30, and one at 6. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eric.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. As Randy said, my name is Eric Cass. I'm a Director of Public Finance from PMA Securities. We work with about 180 school districts across the state of Wisconsin in different financial capacities. Hopefully today we can demystify a lot of what Randy was talking about. We're not going to get into all the nuts and bolts. I think the goal of today is in the next 10 to 15 minutes is to give you a very high level understanding in terms of how schools are funded. And I think if you can understand some of the concepts we're talking about today, you're going to get about 80% of where funding comes from for school districts and how Shawano is kind of positioned, and show a little bit of history as it relates to that as well. So the core concepts that we're going to try to talk about today is a little bit of basis of school funding. So we're going to talk about and unpack a little bit the major funding sources for schools and show some data as it relates to the Shawano School District. We're going to talk about how the property tax levy comes together. As Randy talked about, there's different pressures and different buckets of money, so to speak. And so we're going to show how those come together for the school district of Shawano, and then we're going to get into calculating the mill rate. So if you're a citizen, own real estate, commercial property, whatever, you pay taxes. The school portion, we're going to explain a little bit about how that comes together for the Shawano School District. Then we wanted to highlight the debt capacity for Shawano. So per state law, every municipal entity, and specifically school districts, are governed by a maximum that the state sets. So we're going to explain how that comes together and give you a little insight into that. And then the final thing we'll show you is a little bit of a mill rate history for the Shawano School District and how that compares to surrounding school districts, the ones right around this area that you probably are familiar with. So jumping right into some basics of school funding. So prior to 1993, I would call it here in Wisconsin a little bit of the wild, wild west as it related to school funding. So local communities were given 100% autonomy. School boards could set their property tax levy wherever they wanted to, and spending from a legislative perspective, was a little bit willy-nilly and kind of out of control. So in 1993, the state legislature created something called revenue limits. And the genius behind revenue limits was the state legislature said, we don't care how much you spend, but what we care is how much you can get in total revenue. So that total revenue fell into two buckets that were part of that revenue limit formula that still exists today. It hasn't changed since 1993. One large bucket is what's called general state aids. So every 2 years, the state of Wisconsin creates a biennial budget. Part of that biennial budget, one of the largest parts, is funding for K-12 education. So K-12 education funding is doled out to 424 school districts in what's called general state aids, simply a property tax offset. So when you hear state funding increasing for schools, you also need to understand that it's not always new money. A lot of times the state of Wisconsin gives more money to education, but it's in the form of property tax offsets. So your property taxes will go down, but in essence the school district isn't necessarily going to get more money. The other major bucket is select local property tax levies. So when I say the word select, within revenue limits, the school district is governed, but if you have a referendum to exceed that, you can get more money from property taxes. If you have a capital referendum that allows you to renovate your facilities, build new facilities, you can issue debt and levy a tax outside of this formula as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So there's a lot of other small factors that go into it, but the basis of the revenue limit formula is it takes enrollment. So here in Shawano, where enrollment has been going down, that's one of the reasons why revenue has been going down, times a maximum per pupil revenue. So that's a calculation that's individually based. So I said 424 school districts. One of the hidden unfortunate circumstances that happened back in 1993 is no two school districts were created equal. I talked about prior to 1993, so let's take 1992. School districts were spending all over the place. Shawano might have been very conservative and wasn't spending a lot. You go to a different community, that school board was levying taxes and spending a lot more. My point is that in 1993, every school district was frozen and locked in place. So based upon your spending in 1992 is where you started. And then every school district legislatively was provided annual increases that were allowable, normally between $100 and $200 on an annual basis. Currently, in this year, the school districts are getting $0, but they grew kind of exponentially since 1993. Fast forward till today, Shawano School District is positioned based upon how they spent in 1992 in comparison to every other school district. So point being, you have school districts that were spending a lot in 1992 that could be $1,000 or $2,000 per kid funded more heavily than the Shawano School District because they were in a different position in 1992. Not saying that's right or wrong, but I think it's an important piece of how that funding formula kind of comes together. So once you take that enrollment times that maximum per pupil revenue, which is recalculated every year based upon what the legislator allows that to go up on a per pupil basis, it gives you what's called your allowable revenue. And that is broken down into what you can receive in general state aids and then what those select local property tax levies are. So let's look at the Shawano School District. So we're currently in the 2021-2022 school year. So in November of every year, the school board certifies the tax levy. And for the Shawano School District, the total local tax levy was $14,684,071. That's the total levy associated with the school district. That's offset by those general state aids where the school districts gets just short of $16.5 million. So that's important because they are funded about 50 to 55% from the state of Wisconsin and about 45% from the local property tax levy in total. When we break that down, when we talk about the select local taxes, the revenue limit authority as it relates to the funding is that number, $8.6 million. So with no other levies associated, I'm going to talk about these two, the allowable levy is $8.6 million plus those general state aids. So that's what supports the general operations of the school district. So the educational on a daily basis, paying staff, paying utility bills, transportation bills, all that kind of stuff, that's where that comes from. Now the school district in the past had a capital referendum and issued debt. Associated with that is the ability to levy the amount necessary to repay the investors on that. So that includes principal and interest. So last year, the school district levied $5.728 million. But a portion of that, which I'll talk about when we show the mill rate, is the school district has been levying more into this fund to maintain a level mill rate and not having that increase or have a sharp decline in order to pay that debt off more quickly. So the school district has taken what's been a 20-year amortization, because under state law here in Wisconsin, you can repay those capital borrowings over a maximum of 20 years, and they began to shorten that, saving interest along the way. So right now they're at about 16 to 17 years of amortization, saving 4 years of interest and lopping off the end of that capital borrowing. Then they also have a small portion of a levy that goes to what's called community service. So under state law, school districts are able to levy a portion to support facility usage outside of the educational day. So when facilities are used for different community events and open to the community for different things, sometimes it's evening basketball programs and that nature, they're able to calculate the utility costs and staff costs to keep those facilities open, and that's what that levy supports. So that again, in aggregate, is about $14.7 million that was levied in those three buckets for the school district. So calculating the mill rate. So the mill rate is basically a calculation that takes your total levy and the total equalized value of the Shawano School District. So that's not just the city of Shawano, it's the entire municipals that are within the boundaries of the Shawano School District. So this last fall, it was just under a little bit over $1.5 billion of total property evaluation for the Shawano School District. So that is, you take the total levy and you divide it by that, and it's appropriated across all the different properties, commercial, residential, farmland, everything, multiplied by 1,000, and you get that mill rate. That's $9.56. So if you have a $100,000 home, property, commercial real estate, whatever it might be, your school portion would be $9.56 to support the school operations that we just talked about from the levy standpoint, that whole $14 million. That's how that's appropriated across all property owners within the boundaries of the school district. Calculating allowable debt capacity. So I talked a little bit about that at the beginning. So under state law, a school district cannot exceed 10% of their equalized value. So their equalized value, which is a little bit different number because it includes TIDs, and if you don't know what TIDs are, those are tax incremental districts. So it includes the value of those TIDs in this calculation, where you see here, they don't get the value of the TIDs until that TID closes. The Department of Revenue calculates the value within the TID because that has to be reported on an annual basis, so this number will always be a little bit higher, but you're allowed to have up to 10% of your equalized valuation TID in outstanding, which for the Shawano School District would be just short of $160 million. You have to remove outstanding debt, which currently is $11.2 million, and that will change shortly when the principal payment happens. And that remains $148.5 million roughly, or 93% outstanding of debt capacity. Very few times do school districts ever bump up against that, but it's just an important thing to understand that there is a governance structure in place for all Wisconsin school districts as it pertains to allowable debt outstanding for capital purposes. Let's talk about mill rate history a little bit, which I think is an important story for the Shawano School District. When you see back here, and if we would go back into time, there's a lot of volatility that happens with mill rates. We talked about that school funding and how it's balanced with property taxes and state funding. Well, the school districts are a lot of times at the behest of the local legislature and how funding is being supported to school districts. So when more state aids are available, we see mill rates dropping like we do here from 2017 to 2018. When state funding backs off a little bit, we start feeling pressure on local property taxpayers. So what the school district has done over time is manage their levy or their mill rate over, and you can see the last 4 years here, within a very tight band in order to, maintain a little bit of less of that roller coaster ride that a lot of communities see. And what they've done is they've allowed themselves to kind of fill up this gray bar a little bit as the blue bar has gone down. So in order to take advantage of some additions to state funding and maybe some decreases in enrollment, but not putting more on the backs of property taxpayers, they've been very strategic in how they've approached that. And that gray bar has gone to that earlier comment that I talked about in repaying that debt in a lot faster duration in order to save you and a lot of local property taxpayers long-term interest savings by paying off that debt a lot more quickly. Finally, and I know this is a lot of color here that brings together different school districts up here at the top. You can see Gresham is the highest mill rate in the comparative area. Clintonville is second, all the way down to Marion, which is just about $6.50. One of the keys about Marion is they don't have any debt outstanding. I think they either just passed a referendum or are looking to, so they're gonna jump up. But Shawano's right in the middle of this comparative school district that you can see all the different names at the top there. So just some comparative data as it relates to how school districts kind of come together. You can see they have a larger chunk of Fund 39, which we highlighted on the other page in comparison. That I think plays to that strategy that they're trying to maintain that flat mill rate, being strategic about it, and using those resources in that debt bucket to pay down debt more quickly. The last thing I would highlight here is that this green bar is a prime example of what Randy was talking about. So the legislature has laws on these different buckets of money. We talked about the general operations and the different levies. This green bucket can go for no other purpose than to pay existing debt. Once that green bucket goes away and debt's paid off, that goes away. It can't go into the blue bar, it can't go into another bar, which we did in one of these community conversations. And I think an individual that understood school or city finance asked, why can't you just shift those resources to new debt or to something else? That green bar can only continue once debt is expired by asking the communities to support another capital referendum or another purpose. It can't just be decided to issue more debt by the school board. There has to be a community conversation, and there has to be a decision and a vote by the community in order to do that. I know that's a lot of information. Are there any questions on stuff that I covered before I kind of turn it over to Josh to talk a little bit about the current school district budget? Josh?
All right. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
So I don't have any fancy slides like Eric does. I just wanted to really just give an update on our 2022 budget. You may have seen that we're facing a $2 million budget deficit in the paper. This is true, but I want you to know that this didn't happen overnight. So based on our declining enrollment and a lot of other factors, we faced a budget deficit of $400,000 in 2021, and we faced a budget deficit of $600,000 in this current fiscal year. What we did is we took money from the federal government, the CARES Act, to balance the budget 2 years ago, and this year we're dipping into our fund balance or our savings account to balance the budget. So we have to really take a look at our programming and our staffing and all the buildings that we have, because we can't continue to spend at our current level, knowing that our enrollment is declining and therefore our revenue is declining. Eventually that federal money, that one-time ESSER money that they're giving us is gonna run out. The state did us no favors with the $0 per revenue increase. So Eric mentioned typically it's between $100 and $200 every year per member increase. This last state biennium budget, it was $0. So we had $0 this year and we get $0 next year. Combine that with declining enrollment, our revenue really keeps decreasing. So knowing that our revenue has been decreasing, but our spending hasn't the last 2 years, we're kind of at a point where we really need to make some hard decisions and look at how can we save money, because we know we can't increase our revenue. The state's not going to let us do that. So really our only other alternative is to decrease our spending. One of the ways, I'm sure you've heard the rumors, is looking at closing a building. That gets us savings. If we don't close a building, then we're looking at additional staffing, additional programming. We offer a lot of great programs for the students. We don't want to change that. There's a lot of options, a lot of quality education for the students K-12. We don't want to start changing those and limiting offerings to the students. So closing a building is one of the ways we can get some savings without impacting programming and without impacting staff. And also a common misconception out there is if you close a building, class size will increase. That's actually not true. It's the other way around. So we could get about $600,000 of savings with a building closure. If we don't close a building, that $600,000 would have to come from staff or programs. So fewer teachers then means class size goes up. So one of the frustrations that Randy mentioned to you before too is we are very healthy financially in some of our areas. So food service, I actually just got a letter from DPI yesterday saying your food service fund balance is above the 3-month expenditure limit. You need to spend this down and send us a plan for how you're going to spend that down. Our plan can't be we're going to transfer that to the general fund and pay for some teachers. We need to spend it in food service. Our community service fund is very healthy. We have a lot of programs available to the community. we are limited. Once we levy taxes in community service, we can't transfer that and say, okay, well, we don't need it here anymore. We're gonna use that to pay for a teacher. We can't do that. Another challenge is special education fund. So because we receive federal funding, we have a requirement called maintenance of effort, meaning we can't decrease our spending in special education because we need to maintain our programming for our special education students. So you have all these different buckets that are healthy, but then our general operations are not. So really the cuts can only come from that one bucket. We're trying to be creative with everything we can do. We're taking ideas, but that $2 million is a big number out there. But unfortunately, if we don't address this now, it's going to continue to grow next year with health insurance rates and inflation. It's obviously through the roof, and CPI is the number we're using that school districts use is 4.7%, and I know it's gone up since then. So really a challenging time. Eric mentioned too that there's no new money for schools. You might hear the state say, well, school funding is at an all-time high. Well, it is, but it's just property tax relief. It's not new money. So schools are, and not only Shawano, we're in a really difficult position. Declining enrollment is prevalent statewide. It's nothing that Shawano's doing. Randy has mentioned in previous meetings, people aren't having kids at the same rate they used to. It's just how it is these days. So we can't, unless we get enrollment up, we're not going to see our revenue increase. One of the other challenges that I want to mention is the private school voucher program. So this started 2015-16. Participation in the statewide private school voucher program has increased 550% since that time, in the last 7 years. So Shawano School District, the taxpayers pay over $1 million for the private school voucher program, and that's going to continue to increase. So that's over 80 cents of that mill rate within that blue bar goes to the private schools. So if we didn't have the private school voucher program, our mill rate would be 80 cents lower. It's going to vary based on every school district, but that's something that is an added challenge that we can't control how many students are participating in that program. So,
and the cap comes off, right?
Right. So the cap increases 1% each year. I think we're at 7 or 8%. It gets to 10%, and then an increase comes off. So really, the state's kind of funding two different education programs at this point. It's going to be challenging, but we're not alone. We're not alone with the declining enrollment. So kind of a quick budget update for everyone here, and if you have any questions about that or for Eric, be happy to take any questions you have.
Who decides if a school's going to be closed? School board?
The school board makes that decision.
On their own?
Mhm.
I mean, there's no referendum?
No.
You just take the input of all of us on the outside,
Mhm.
but the final decision is the school board just decides.
Correct.
Now, there's been a lot of rumors out there,
Mhm.
a lot of posts on Facebook, stuff's flying in this city, town, district. But say you did close Olga Brenner, and I know you probably talked about it. As far as everybody's concerned out there, the decision's already been made. What happens to that school? Now, we've heard rumors that you're already looking for plans to turn it into something or whatever it is.
Mhm.
That sits on school property anyway. So are you looking to outsource it to somebody else out there, a private organization, or what are you looking to do with it? Because you just poured a lot of money into that school.
Right. We
Okay.
certainly wouldn't want it to become vacant and just run down in an eyesore. We would
Well,
want to partner with someone to.
You know, it's a little hard to swallow when you read stuff, and like I say, a lot of it's rumors and things like that, but we've just poured a lot of money into Olga Brenner. School playground equipment, the whole works.
Yep.
Now you want to turn around, and I've seen a number pouring into a playground now at Hillcrest for $300 and some odd thousand. Now for the common person out there, okay, that's a little hard to swallow.
Right.
Okay, so you can understand why a lot of us out there are just questioning who's making all these decisions, and they're looking at salaries of people and things like that, and, you know. Now, you used to run a business here in town myself, so I know when business goes bad, you have to lay off people. Well, that's understandable. But when you start closing really nice looking buildings and things like that.
Definitely. And so, yes, like you said, the maybe a rumor, but the decision has not been made. We had a finance committee meeting last night. We're still looking at two options. Middle school, Overbrenner. How can we move students around that has the best impact to students and minimizes the staff impact while still offering programming? So one of the reasons we were looking at Overbrenner is it wouldn't take a lot of investment. Yes, $300,000 to get some new playground equipment at Hillcrest because we would have more students there. But if we close the middle school and bring programs to Brenner or the high school and shifting students around that way, that would take even a significant more investment, over millions of dollars, $2 million roughly. So there's cost aspect to that as well as knowing that, yes, we did just invest in Olga Brenner. But
Yeah,
there's,
my question to that is, we have all this insight, everybody's looking forward years out or whatever. You know, I heard what you said about people not having kids. Well, I've seen a post where it says people won't have as many kids in 2030. Okay, well, if we can look out that far that people aren't having kids doing that, we certainly should be able to see how our school district is going or whatever. You can tell me we're not gonna have kids or whatever.
yep.
But it's just, I don't know, it's just hard to swallow some of the big numbers that are out there. And like I say, a lot of people just rely on the school board, superintendent, everybody, you know, you're doing your jobs of what you're doing, but all of a sudden here we sit, $2 million in debt. You're gonna have to make some tough decisions, but I really, really hope that they're taking a lot of input from the outside. One of the biggest things that you preach, all of you, is transparency out there. Yet, I see a lot of little meetings inside of your schools when I go into them of teachers talking. They seem to be afraid to talk to you people. Why is that? There seems to be like a target thing. You're not really liked a lot by some people. I'm sorry, I know the position that you're in. I'm just being honest with you. I see the position that you're in, the tough calls that people have to make. I was a boss once too. You're not loved by everybody, you know. It's like being a referee, you're never right. But still, there's a lot of little meetings going on. It kind of raises questions when I see teachers that are afraid to come out and talk. And they work for you. Well, they work for all of us, but I mean, you're their bosses and stuff. Why are they so afraid to speak out? There's even some school board members that will talk to you, but they'll talk to you more honest in private rather than out in the open. So that raises a lot of concern with, you know, a lot of us that are out there that are just asking these questions. And then you hear about the school closing, you know, things like that. Yeah, your numbers are, you know, they can see what you're talking about, things like that. But is there a way, I'm just going to ask this, does this decision have to be made already this year, or is it absolute that school would have to be closed this year? That's going to be the biggest thing. Can you go another year and say, what can we do to lessen this blow without
That's what we
growing
did
into
the
3
last-
million or 4 million or whatever it's going to be? Is it that radical, or does this definitely have to happen? And is Oka Brenner, or is it the middle school?
Right.
Middle school's looking pretty old, you know, been around for a while, and offers a lot and things like that, but does it have to be Oka Brenner, which is a very nice multi-million-dollar building too?
So to answer a couple of your questions, we started, so in 2019, 2020, when we started to build the 2020-21 budget, we were $400,000 over in our annual revenue. So in other words, our cost, our staffing costs, our programs costs had gone up. But we were also in the middle of a global pandemic. And so we made the decision at that time to say, you know what, we're not going to make reductions. We're going to use the ESSER dollars that we've gotten from the federal government to be able to offset those reductions. So in essence, when you say, can we kick the can down the road? We can. But that was $400,000 that first year. Last year, the board approved a budget that didn't balance at $600,000. And now, because of a perfect storm of zero on the revenue, declining enrollment, so one of the pieces we didn't talk about is in the state of Wisconsin, you get 3 years of declining enrollment before your revenue actually gets impacted significantly. Well, the perfect storm of that impact was this year. So not only did we not get that extra $400,000 to $500,000 on a revenue increase that you typically get on a biennium, we also took a hit because of our declining enrollment. So going into this year, making a best assumption, we knew that we were going to be close to $1 million. But because of a perfect storm, we ended up in that $2 million bucket. Health insurance costs went up significantly. We honored staff and were able to give them a 1.7% on their salary increase. And so when you look at those pieces, we're now at that $2 million. So can the board, can we say, you know what, we don't want to make that decision this year. We're right-sizing our organization. We have to make some reductions just because of declining enrollment. So we can take that chunk, which is about $1 million, give or take that off, and we could go into next year with $1 million deficit. But because we're at a zero on the dollar again next year, so we don't have an increase in revenue, we know that the cost of inflation is going to be at least 4.7 on heats, lights, just keeping our buildings open, right? Because we can see what's happening to that. So now that $1 million that we would be looking at next year is probably going to be 2 to 3. And we're going to be right back into the difficult conversations that we have to have around staff and personnel. And so our recommendation is, as an administrative team, is we've delayed due to a global pandemic to address these issues already. And if we kick that down the road again, it just magnifies that delay. But can we do that? Is that an option? Absolutely. Is it an option that the board's having a conversation about? Absolutely. And the decision has not been made. We are still, as an administrative team, looking at scenarios. We have 2 old plants, right? We have Olga Brenner and we have the middle school. So we are running, and last night at Finance Committee, the administrative team presented 4 different scenarios that said, what happens if we right size, right? Here are the staff reductions. What happens if we close Olga Brenner and it disperses the students this way? What happens and what's the cost to that? What happens if we close the middle school and disperse students this way? And what's the cost to that? There's multiple different scenarios right now that we are looking at and running to be able to see how can we continue to do. Our goal as an administrative team is to keep our reductions away from programs and students as best as possible. Knowing, however, that when you're in the place where we are, and if we consolidate a building, we know that staff get impacted, right? Because we were able to create some efficiencies. And so, to answer your question, yes, we can move it down the road. Recommendation from the administrative team, sometimes you just need to address it and make those decisions. As far as what's going to happen to those 2 physical plants or buildings, we are in conversations with the city, we're in conversations with the county, we're in conversations with entities outside of Shawano School District in Shawano community, to be able to say, how can we leverage that space to better serve our community? What are some of the choices and options that we have out there for that? Can that be fully implemented if we take a plant offline by fall? Absolutely not. But it's hard to have those conversations with people and get commitments when you don't know whether you're taking a plant off the line. So it's a perfect storm in how can we have those conversations, how can we have a plan, how can we leverage those buildings to the best of our ability. We also know that we have a need with our gym space, right? And our gym space with our community ed programs are used from 4 o'clock in the evening till 10 o'clock at night, Monday through Sunday. So we don't want to completely take it offline. We want to be able to find partnerships to be able to continue to leverage and use that. How can we grow those programs? How can we bring entrepreneurship into the community? Those are all things that we're taking a look at. But at the end of the day, if you are a businessman, retired, and you have the capacity to serve 3,300 students, but you only have 2,000, you can't continue to keep the capacity at 3,300 unless you can increase your capacity. And so let's look at Shawano County birth rate. Now, Shawano County birth rate is really a huge assumption on my part because it feeds 10 school districts. But we've looked at that data. And unfortunately, from 2020 to 2008, it is a steady decline. You might have an up, right, cold winter, and then it comes back down. But over that period of time, our enrollment is going down. So when you talk about how can I forecast that forward, I forecast that forward based on a flat assumption, and in reality, it's going to be declining because my number continues to decline, but I can't get my arms on that. But what I can share is my graduating class is 200, my incoming class is 140. That's a 60 student a year difference, and those small classes are now moving into my middle school.
Now I have a question for you. How many kids, and you probably have this number, are not living in our district but going to a different district for education? You must have that number.
Yep. So.
And then my question would be, has anybody ever looked into why is that? You know?
Yep.
And I know you got your choices of schools you can go to and everything. I just find it odd that you live in the city of Shawano or close to the area. You got all these nice schools and everything, but you choose to go to a different district for the education. You know, that's kind of a concerning thing too, when when you look at stuff and you just go, okay, our enrollment's declining. How many kids are we losing? Not because the families got smaller, but because they've chosen to go to a different school district for whatever reasons, you know?
And
So those
I don't know the
numbers,
numbers offhand.
those
Randy.
numbers have historically been a net positive. We have typically had more students coming into our district than we do have going out of the district. COVID has really impacted that, and we're starting to shift to have more students going out than they do coming in. A lot of that goes to private school, a lot of that goes to virtual schools, and we have some that are moving out of the area. We also have some that are going to the surrounding districts, right? So it's a combination of all of those pieces, and it's not a single entity, but also a lot of it goes to the marketing and the messaging that we have in our community. We have an amazing district. We have huge programs. We have a music program that is phenomenal. We have an athletic program that is continuing to grow. And those are the things that have to get out that your small rural districts don't have. We also have choice and option inside our middle schools and high schools, so our students can take family and consumer science. Our students can take technology classes. Our students have the opportunity to learn about law classes up at the high school. Those are choices that we have that many districts don't have because we have the benefit of a size. And we need to market those things. But we are, full disclosure, our own worst enemy. When you said, why won't people come talk to me? Tell me. My door is open. You can walk in, you can have a conversation. So when you hear that, what I ask of you, and I appreciate you all being here this morning, is talk to her. Go talk to the administration team. Talk to the building level administration team. We are more than open to have a conversation. These are tough times.
But I think the word I hear, target. If I speak out, I'm a target. And now, you know, and I've been in the positions of that, okay? And no, I don't like wash off my back because even as a boss, you like to be liked by everybody. And you know, when you make a decision, everybody's not gonna like it or whatever it is, you're doing it in the best interest of what everybody, you know, to keep everybody, as many working as what you can. But I've heard it so many times in just this last couple months. And like I said, I've been around the schools, so I've been able to, when I walk up and I see a group of 4 teachers together, and all of a sudden everything just goes silent till I'm past them. Well, and I've heard names, okay, and I'm not stupid or anything like that. I just go, why can't you just go? So I asked, and they go, because you can't talk to them people. You become a target. And I'm going, really? And that's why, you know, they say, they reckon it to like a dictatorship rather than a open transparency, da-da-da-da-da, or whatever it is. I'm sorry, but that's the honest,
We
that's
don't
my,
take it
that's the
personally.
honest thing, I'm not gonna lie to you. But that's what you hear out there. Then you throw in the school closings and things like that, and then, you know, I know the schools like St. James and Sacred Heart impact what you're doing. I mean, my kids went through St. James and things like that, and I was a public school person, so when they changed Lincoln School into a place where you can live, I thought, this is really cool, because now I can still see that school from my heydays, you know, things like that, but I'm sorry, I look at that middle school and I just look, oh, it looks like that's gonna be a little money to keep going, and even if you were to close Olga Brenner, you still have the upkeep that you're gonna have to keep it going so that the school doesn't go, you know, down the tubes like you see some of the buildings in this town when they're left empty.
So
You know,
there's
there's a cost there too.
There's
so.
$26 million in deferred maintenance right now that has to be addressed, and that's in our 4 plants. And that is the conversation that we're having with the stakeholder group. So we have a group of about 40 people. Half of them are from the school district, representing all employee groups, and then half of them are from the business that represent, or from the community that represent retired, represent business owners, represent clergy, or some of the other big buckets on there. But looked at my administrative team and said, who are our key stakeholders in our community to bring them to the table, to have the conversations, to be able to guide that, to say what can we, when we talk about our mill rate, what does the community want to support for us as a district, and how do we want to be able to move that forward. So that group has met twice now, once in January, once in February, and they're meeting on Tuesday night. And they've established some of the priorities that they would like to be able to then take out to the community to say these are the things that we need. That $26 million, in my personal opinion, is really non-negotiables, because it's what we call deferred maintenance. Much like on your house, you know you have to replace your roof, your windows, your heating and cooling every 15 to 20 years, right? Deferred maintenance for the school system is the same thing. Unfortunately, when I came into the school district, we didn't have a long-range facility plan that said, okay, if your high school is going to be 25 years old, you know that in 25 years, what are you going to have to replace? Your HVAC's going to go, your roof's going to need to be resealed, your parking lots are going to need to reseal. And unfortunately, as a school district, you can't accomplish all of that in a single year. One chiller on our high school is a $500,000 cost. I don't have that kind of budget when I'm a $33 million budget. So I have to look at how can I stagger that out over years of time. So when we take that $26 million that we need over the next 10 years, that's $2 to $3 million every year that we need to be able to put into all of our plants. The only way that $26 million would change is if we would take one of the plants offline. That gets to what you're talking about with the middle school or with Olga Brenner. If I take the middle school offline, I don't have my numbers in front of me.
About $8 million.
But it's about an
over
$8
10
million
years.
savings on that 26. If I take Olga Brenner offline,
It's 4.
it's a $4 million piece. So then, as you said, Olga Middle School is our oldest building, right? So when we started this conversation, we said, let's take the middle school offline. However, the middle school has our maintenance shops. The middle school has the welcome center. The middle school has larger gym capacity. And so you start looking at those pieces that if we removed that building, what would happen to those pieces and where would we house those? And so that's why the decision, I want to be very clear that the decision hasn't been made. And that's a lot of rumors. And those rumors are on our staff, because our staff are making assumptions rather than having conversations with their building administrator. We send out monthly memos to the staff in an email that kind of share, here's where we're at, here's what we're doing. But it's kind of like the telephone game. When I start over here at the letter A and I look at Eric and I say it's a banana, by the time it gets to Sean, it's a zebra. And that's what's happening inside of our community, and that's why we are out right now having conversations with the community to help dispel those myths and dispel those rumors and to be completely transparent. And that's what we're going to continue to do.
And I'm listening to everything you're saying, and again, I talked about the transparency and everything out there, but some are And you're right, social media is one of our worst things that was ever invented anyway, you know. It allows people to be a keyboard warrior rather than a face-to-person, you know, face-to-face and get it out there. So I ask you these questions here. You know, I've never met you, so.
Nope.
And I've never met you or anybody else. I read all the stuff that's on there. And you know, a lot of the people in this community, a lot of people in the district don't go to all your meetings. Some watch them virtual and things like that. You know why? Because they trust what you're doing is for the benefit of the district itself. So, you know, you're gonna take a lot of heat for the decisions that you make and things like that. You talk about the teachers spreading the rumors or whatever it is. Well, yeah, they may say things, but then the rest of us on the outside that aren't on the inside of this whole thing start questioning, what, we got a war going on inside the district, or what is it? Why can't so-and-so talk to so-and-so and not be held accountable for it? Because I know I bring back, as I was a boss, it was always an open door thing, but most of the time my philosophy was, if you come in with a problem, come in with two solutions for me, so I know you're using your head, and it's not all on me. You're all very smart people, you know, my workers, that's what I would tell them, as I says, you need to think it. Most of the time, you already have the solution by the time you come in and offer me the problem, you know? I'm just here to help out with the whole thing. But now your meetings that you're having now, everybody thinking it's a little deal to, why weren't these held a long time ago as this thing was growing bigger and bigger? Maybe they were, you know, but a lot of people don't watch the numbers as close, you know, until you hear the word, we want to close a building. And then you've just lit the fireworks off. Especially people who, and I don't have kids going to the district now, but I do have great-grandchildren that'll be coming up through, and I'm already discussions. We go in public school, we go in private school. Which way do you want to go? Because it seems like, okay, if I'm going to push fifth graders over here, or the talk of pushing seventh graders over to a high school. Christ, I remember when I was, excuse my language, but I remember when I was a freshman going to the high school, you know, you're the little tot with the big dogs. And then I did hear a comment this morning, I don't know who wrote it or whatever, that says, well, if you push these young kids over to the high school, then you're introducing pot and beer drinking. And I thought, that was kind of a off the wall thing. I thought, well, you tell me now our high school, this is all that, you know, we've got over here, that if we bring these young kids over, the bullying is gonna start because they're really young. So that makes my decision when I go back to my relatives, I say, oh, you go public school, you can go to at least 8th grade to these, even though you're gonna pay a few more bucks, you know. So there's a lot of things out there in the community right now that people are talking about. They're just looking for a straight answer.
And that's part of the problem, is we don't have answers right now.
Well, but they're looking for it from the horse's mouth, okay? Not across, like you say, you can post that so-and-so is having a child, and before long, that you get past 10 people, and you won't believe how many persons this person has slept with, or whatever. You know, it really gets dragged out and added to because everybody's got to embellish the thing so you'll pay more attention to what I'm saying.
Yep, so just so that you're aware, we went to the middle school and had a conversation, we went to the Ogerbrenner and had a conversation with the staff, and then we had an entire staff, almost 2-hour conversation last week, just kind of sharing the same piece of here's where we're at, here's what we're doing, and we were able to answer their questions that they had, and some of the questions we don't have. We will continue that transparency as we move forward and get into April and have a better path for what our choices and our options are going to do. So you will see opportunities as a community member for surveys. They'll be coming out in April saying, here's where we're at, here's what would you like to see as a community. There'll be stakeholder groups held for the entire community to hear about the priorities that we have, the different choices that we have. So my request is please spread the word. Please, share that you've had the opportunity to have an open dialogue with us this morning. We don't have all the answers. You're absolutely right that whatever decision, I call every decision in the last 3 years that I've been here has been a snow day decision. For those of you that are parents, you know that is a no-win situation. Because if I close it, half of them are going to be angry, and if I keep it open, the other half are going to be angry. And unfortunately, starting a new position in the top of a global pandemic doesn't set a person up for an opportunity to be able to get to know people and then have to have the tough decisions and the tough conversations that we do right now because of where we are and what we're doing. So I'll just leave it with that we're open. I'd love to have a continued conversation. Reach out. Lori guards my door, and unfortunately she's not a very good guard dog. I'm kidding, that's a joke. It's open, anybody can come in. Love to have conversations with you, love to hear from you. And I love your line, I agree with you 100%. Don't bring me a problem, bring me the solutions to the problems that you have. Myself is not very, doesn't sound right, how am I gonna say this? We're better united and we're better collective, and we have a lot better solution if we're all working together than if it's just one single person coming up with the solution. So I'm open to everything.
I do have one quick question. So, I apologize, but I am a parent of private school children for now. So, here is my question. Is that I was very gung-ho, all three of my kids were very gung-ho, we were gonna switch next year to public school. And then all of this, and then I was like, ooh, hold on. So I guess my question is, because one of my primary concerns with how the private school is going right now is they are jam-packing those classrooms. My son is in 4th grade and he has 28 kids in his class, and that is crazy to me. I pay a lot of money for the potential of my child being in a small class. So I know you said before that those changes aren't necessarily gonna bring larger class sizes, and I'm not saying that I anticipate a classroom only having 15 kids, I get that. I'm just wondering, what does that look like? What, how does that look? If you have those numbers, if you close one, what do those class sizes look like in the future?
Yeah, so
Does that make sense?
Yeah, are you pulling that
Yeah,
up?
I'm gonna pull that,
We
see if I
have
can pull that up real
staffing
quick.
guidelines based on different
Okay.
grade levels, so
Yeah.
as you go up the higher, but it is,
Sorry, I need cheaters.
I know it's not 28.
Yeah, well, and that, because that's that's a lot of kids, and I feel bad, because, it's my oldest who's in that class, and he is I don't want to sound like that mom, but he's a really good student, but if he has questions, I'm like, well, why don't you ask the teacher? Well, Mom, I know she's busy, she's got all those other kids, and I'm like, well, that doesn't mean that you don't get to ask a question,
Right.
so.
Sorry, I'm not finding the right spreadsheet, but, so pre-K 3, under 22. 3 to, I can't remember, is it 3 to 5, Stuart? 3 to 5. Goal is to keep it between 23 to 26. And then when we get into the secondary level, that is 26 to 29. But I can tell you that next year we don't have any of our secondary classes exceeding that 28, I believe it is. So still really looking to keep our primary grades less than 22, and then 23 to 26, and then 26 to 30. And there's a couple of things to think about when you think about class size. I'll just share 1988, first year teacher, North Dakota, I had 29 first graders. My second year I had 29 first graders. My third year I had 27 first graders. And one of the things is, although that's a lot of students, one of the things that it allows you to do as a teacher is to have that student-to-student interaction and that collaboration. And Hattie, who is an educational researcher, will tell you that one of the biggest effect sizes on academic student performance is actually that peer-to-peer interaction over an adult, over any instructional strategy. So when you have a little bit larger class, and I'm not advocating for 29, please, that's not it. I want to keep our primary classes under 22, absolutely. But when we're able to put kids into small groups and have that peer-to-peer interaction in guided and facilitated conversations, that has a positive impact to student achievement. And when we start to get to really small classes, then you don't have that wealth and that opportunity for students to interact. But to answer your question, I would love to have a conversation. We can talk one-on-one, and I can give you the specifics and share with you, because it's not confidential data. It's what our class sizes look like. And it might even be in some of the documents that are posted under the stakeholder group, because that was the biggest fear, is that if you close
close Oberbrenner, we're gonna have class sizes of 30, and there was a rumor out there that our staff and students were flooding to the private schools because we were going to be at 30. One, we're not going to be at 30. Two, every classroom teacher is still going to have a classroom. We're not putting people on top of each other if we would move that direction. There is the space in the plant to be able to do that. So, but you know, the other piece is choice in programs, right? The opportunities for students for the after-school programming, for the athletics, for the band.
Well, that was a big part of that thought process is, does St. James do a fantastic job? 100%, absolutely. Have my kids been happy? Absolutely. But I'm looking at, my husband and I were public school kids, and I think we turned out just fine. But when I look at what they could potentially be missing out on, you know, there's that whole give and take. And so that was part of the catalyst of us being like, well, maybe, you know, and I have twins, and they're wonderful, but they need some space from one another as well. And so having that ability to have them in separate classrooms is also, you know, that was a big part of it. And they're not gonna do that. They're just gonna jam those kids in one classroom, which whatever. So there's a lot of things that are behind that decision, and I think, you know, that's why I wanted to sit in here, is just to kind of listen and hear what is really, what the thoughts are, what that process looks like. I mean, I work for the city, I understand budgets, I understand how all of this works, I get that, you know. No, none of us have easy decisions to make, and we're never gonna make everybody happy, and that's an unfortunate truth. I think from the parent standpoint, that's where I'm like, just a little nervous, and so thank you for the understanding of how that's really gonna look. And because as soon as you said, well, the class sizes aren't gonna be these, like, I was like, oh, just a little bit, because, you know, I that is my concern, and also for staff. I want them to feel like they can be successful and all of those things at the same time. And, you know, I think having that ability to have a separate art teacher and a separate gym teacher and all those things. Right now, the St. James teacher, she's doing all of those things. So I'm just talking the talk at this point and making you help me make my decision for my kids, I guess. But
that's actually what we shared last night, is that it's kind of a misunderstanding that if we don't close a building, then we are going to have to look at programs where our teachers would be teaching art, music, and PE at the elementary. We are going to have to look at the large class sizes, because we won't be able to, I mean, it's $500,000 that will have to come from somewhere. And so you start to look at your programs, and your programs at your elementary level are not that expensive. So it's not like we get a huge savings from them, but we have a huge impact on what our overall opportunities are for our students. And so if we don't take a building offline and we don't kick the can down the road, which are all options that we can do, then we're looking at the program piece, and then we are looking at classroom sizes of 25 to 28 at the elementary level, which nobody wants to support.
You know, I always looked at the private schools as the stability, because I could send our kids, and we did go to St. David, from kindergarten all the way up to 8th grade before we made a move. When I was watching the public schools, well, back then in the years, they weren't changing so much, but now you have so much going on. You know, kids, do I go to Hillcrest, am I back to Oakland, am I over to the middle school, or what, especially in the elementary part of it. Where going to the private school, it was stable all the way up to 8th grade, you know, before we had to make a move. You know, so that was a decision, and I agree with you, the programs the kids could get in, but we still had the kids going all over the different programs, soccer, the whole, you know, getting them involved in everything that we could.
well, sure, yeah, I mean, my kids are.
So you got your,
involved.
you got your choices to make. My last question would be for you is, when do you come to this decision of what you're gonna do? You know, there's gotta be a time frame out there that says, this is the last day before, you know, either decide we're gonna kick the can down the road, or we need to make it now. So I think some people are gonna question, when does that D-Day come, whichever way it's gonna go.
And so, back mapping it a little bit, the board has to make a decision about going out for a capital referendum, or, we didn't talk about it today, but there is the chance that you could go out for an operating referendum, which is very different. The success in communities that try to go out for both an operating referendum and a capital referendum all in the same year is very low. Communities have a really hard time supporting that. But that is part of the decision that has to be made, and those decisions have to be made by August. The decision around staffing and right sizing will go to the board on Monday night, and that is by state statute. So due to state statute, all teachers have to be notified by April 30th to honor our staff. We want to do that as early as we possibly can. So we're gonna do that in March, and that will take that first cut, and we'll have a better idea then on, okay, now we have our retirements that we're not replacing, we have our staff that we have to reduce due to right sizing and declining enrollment, and now we have the building conversation, program conversation, and additional staff. As an administrative team, the month of April is going to be very, very busy, working with community, having conversations with stakeholder groups, and continuing to have conversations with the board about what our choices and options are. Our drop dead for the community would be May, in making a decision before school got out, right? So that everybody would know, here's what fall is going to look like, including staff, including families, so families can make the decision. So if this is closing, what does it look right? So May is our drop dead. Ideally, we'd like to have that the second board meeting in April, but because there's so many moving parts to this puzzle, more than likely, it's going to be May, just full disclosure.
You have a referendum coming in November?
No, we don't.
You don't?
That's what I said, the board has to make that decision in August.
Okay.
So the board will call the question in August, and I do not know whether we will go out or not. That really becomes that stakeholder group piece. So that stakeholder group that's meeting on Tuesday night is having the conversations around the capital costs that we have as a district and how we want to be able to support those capital costs. What Eric didn't get into today is, well, he did, but he didn't, is if we don't go out for a capital, our mill rate drops significantly. Then the state drops funding because they see we don't have as much expenses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now we're at a point where we have no choice but to go out for operating, and you're gonna have a significant increase in your mill rate. Our goal, and please guys, I should pass it to you two because this is not, that's why I have a team, but our goal is to keep that mill rate flat, right? To have, other than your property taxes going up, you don't see an increase from your school district. We're able to maintain our services, maintain our programs at this flat rate. We have an opportunity to call a question in November. We have an opportunity to call a question in April. And we have an opportunity the following November. If, as a school district, we're unable to call a question at that time, our debt completely falls off, which you see what will happen to our mill rate, right? That's not where we want to be. We want to be able to maintain that flat mill rate. And so our hope is that the community will support that capital referendum to be able to keep our buildings up and running. And we're also having the conversations about, when I walked in 3 years ago, we had a need with our football field, with our fine arts programs, and that's about a $5 to $6 million need, although with costs going, it's kind of, I'm shooting in the dark here, because who knows what those costs are going to be by the time that money would come in and I could start doing that work. But that's part of the stakeholder group piece, to say, does the community support the renovations in the football field, the fine arts area, the pool area, the weight room. There are some needs that we've had for several years that need to be addressed. Does the community support the deferred maintenance needs? And the good thing about that is if the community would support both of those pieces, we're still in a spot, and I'm looking over here because inflation rates have gone crazy, but we're still in a spot that we don't have to increase our mill rate, that more than likely our mill rate can still go down. So that's also a really important message to the community, is that we can take care of our needs and not on your back. And we can maintain our programs, we can maintain our staff, but we do have to make some tough decisions to continue to be fiscally responsible. So
By the way, is this meeting virtual tonight, or do you have to be in one of these meetings to get all these
nope.
answers?
So what we're going to do is we're recording.
Oh, okay.
And so what we're gonna do is we're recording all 3 sessions, and we're gonna combine them, and obviously there'll be some edits, full disclosure, and then we'll put it up on the web,
Okay.
so that people are able to view it. But
Okay.
3 times, by the time we do it at 6 o'clock tonight, we should be notified.
Hopefully you get the answers you're looking for, because I know everybody on the outside is looking for answers. You know, maybe we'll put a stop to some of the rumors that are floating out there. You know, I know you did a sort of staff survey, I heard, and I heard there was feedback off in there, so. Although some, again, are not quite sure it was answered like you're saying, you know, you had your meetings with teachers at schools and things like that. And as you know, when you hold one of the big meetings, there's a lot of little meetings after. When the real stuff is said or done or whatever, okay, then they're done that. So, well, I appreciate it. I got some answers anyway.
Well, please know you can reach out at any time. Thank you for being here this morning, and spread the word, grab a donut. Those aren't on district dollars, I just want to be clear. And have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Appreciate your time.